Chapter 3, Geneseo. I should have gone to Marist College. Marist accepted me first. That's what was running through my head as the reality of the 5-hour commute from my home to the college in Geneseo finally began to sink in. There would be no quick trips to places I know, and I would have no car. No, I could never go there. I didn't win that race I was supposed to win. That side stitch had been ferocious. It hit the underside of my ribs as I crested a hill with just 3/4 of a mile to go in the high school invitational race. With it went any chance of winning. College scouts would be there, we had heard beforehand, scouts that awarded fast runner scholarships. A scholarship sounded plenty good to me. My training had been going well. Many of the other top area runners were racing down at Van Cortlandt Park in New York City, and the course, winding and hilly, seemed made in order for a strength runner such as myself. Working my way up to the lead pack as we reached the 2nd-mile mark was easier than I thought it would be, and my legs still felt strong and fresh. I was so relaxed and so confident at that point that I allowed myself a few moments to take in the Marist College landscape. What surprised me more than the majestic and scenic vistas overlooking the Hudson River were the multiple bed sheets hanging out of dorm windows, the number of crushed plastic party cups on the grass lawn, and the overall lack of students out cheering for the runners. It must have been some party last night. I wondered, as Marist was a Catholic school, if there would be severe repercussions for such unruly behavior. Right then, as I began to pump my arms to begin my surge to the final line, the cramp hit. Afterwards, I sat dejectedly on a bench in the men's locker room. I understood all too well that there would be no scouts and no scholarships for me that day. My coach found me. He helped to console me, got me dressed, and walked me onto the team bus. Perhaps being aware of how much doing well in this race meant to me, my teammates left me alone. It would be easy now while sitting inside the bus as it wound its way down the road to enjoy the majestic and scenic vistas overlooking the Hudson River, but I no longer wanted to. I did have several road racing victories to my credit, but that still did not mean that losing was acceptable, particularly while representing my school. Thankfully, I was trained to believe that being a competitive runner was a process, not a result. So it was never a question of whether or not I could accomplish something that I wanted to. It was only a matter of how I would change my routine in order to achieve it. The truth of the matter was that the side stitch incident turned out to be important because it reminded me of a valuable understanding. In order to succeed in life, you need to be able to work through the pain. So I set a valuable goal for myself, to learn how to run through even the most agonizing of cramps. Apples, pears, nectarines. I now bought any type of cramp-inducing foods that I could on my training runs. I would tear bites out of them with my young teeth between breaths as the miles passed underneath my fast-moving feet. I was doing it, purposely inducing cramps in training so that I would learn how to run through them in races, and I did. The result of my newfound dedication was improved running times. Following my disappointing finish in Poughkeepsie that cold, crisp Saturday morning, I clicked off a 33-minute, 59-second 10K, 6.2 miles, in Port Jervis, logged a strong 15-minute, 45-second 5K in the twilight at New Paltz, and then set the new cross-country course record for my high school on a very difficult and hilly course, the kind that I liked. The icing on the proverbial cake was running stride for stride across the finish with the future U.S. Olympian John Troutman, who would represent the United States of America in the 5,000-meter event. Round 1, Heat 3. in the Barcelona Olympic Games in the summer of 1992. Walked up to me before the race and in front of my friends and teammates announced that he was going to break the course record, which at time was my course record. Chapman was a freshman phenom whose running achievements were already being talked about, with relative disbelief in the local high school locker rooms. But his impetuousness reminded me a lot of Alberto Salazar, the hot-headed Oregon State runner who told the world he was going to dethrone four-time winner Bill Rogers, my running hero, in the 1980 New York City Marathon. I intend to beat Billy Rogers at his own game, quote unquote. A strong tailwind had pushed the elite runners along at a brisk pace through the New York City streets, but at the 14-mile mark, Rogers' legs got tangled with another runner's and he fell to the ground. By the time he got up, the other runners had a good 80 yards on him. He would finish in 5th place. His attempt at 5 consecutive victories was over. Salazar, now tagged the rookie in the press, won the race, shaving 30 seconds off Rogers' course record to add insult to injury. I fumed. If Salazar had any class, I informed my board friends the following day on the bus ride to school, he would not have mouthed off to the press beforehand and afterwards. He would have talked about the large crowds supporting his effort along the way. Not a dismissive, I don't want to add to the myth of the marathon. It's just a distance, not a shrine. And I don't think I proved anything to myself, but I imagine I did to a lot of others. The marathon was an event steeped in history, drama, and tradition. From the famous battle of the same name in 490 BC, when a Greek soldier, Pheidippides, ran all the way from the battlefield to Athens to deliver the message, quote unquote Nike, or victory, to the barefooted, the victory of Ethiopian Abibikila in the 1960 Olympics in Rome, the city that had conquered his nation. Just a distance more like selfish ignorance. Now, this high school rookie had just called me out on a much reduced but to me no less meaningful stage. I replied that he was welcome to try, but what was running through my head was, what a jerk. It was a devastatingly hilly cross-county course, a type of course and terrain that rarely offers a runner the chance to settle into a steady pace. On a flat track, his leg speed would have easily left me in the dust. On a flat track, his leg speed would have easily left me in the dust. In fact, Chapman would go on at 46 to set a world age record for the mile in February of 2015, as I was putting the finishing touches on this book with a time of 4 minutes, 12.33 seconds. But give me some hills or tack on a few more miles and watch my leg strength, born of years of marathon running, do the trick. I also had the advantage in 2 other key areas. I had better knowledge of the course, and whereas he was running for a very fast time, I was now running for my, and by imagine proxy Bill Rogers' honor. Against what would normally have been better judgment, I decided to throw caution to the wind, and I went out at a blistering pace. It was a pace that I knew I would not be able to maintain, but I was hoping that I would not actually have to. I had a plan. Because of the limited sight distances that the constant turns and hills and dense foliage on the course created, I was quickly able to break visual contact with him. I knew that it was harder to catch someone that you could not see. I raced as though my life depended on it, imagining I was a colonial settler during the 17th century, trying to escape the flying arrows of a pursuing Indian raid. My father had told me stories of local farmers finding arrowheads in the ground, so it seemed like a fair enough thought to get my body to give that little bit extra. There was no sign of John until I hit the final straightaway, which led to a gathered crowd of onlookers, and the finish line. Troutman came fast charging out of the dense forest trail, and had, with 5 yards to go, closed far enough to be able to reach out and touch my shoulder, had he chosen to do so. My stomach felt like it was being tied in knots. We charged wildly across the finish line, virtually nose to nose, to a loud cacophony of high-pitched yelling and screaming. What a race! John kept his word that day. He broke the existing course record, but so had I. Decades later, many of my former high school teammates still remind me of the day that I held off the great John Troutman. And to his credit, he was decent enough to extend his hand in a goodwill gesture of congratulations afterwards. That simple but gracious gesture, even if he had beaten me, was more than enough to allow me to hope for his success some 10 years later while watching portions of the Olympics with my young daughter sitting atop my shoulders. I recall glancing up at her 3-year-old face and seeing the reflection of the flickering light from the television in her intense green eyes. There were medals and trophies, and then there was life. In that prescient moment, I realized that I wouldn't want to change my past, even if I were somehow able to. John had what he wanted. He was an Olympian. And I had what I wanted, a family. I decided that it was a good time to start thanking God for some of my unanswered prayers. Still, Marist College was a quick 40-minute car ride from my parents' driveway, which was a negligible distance when you consider that I would run for over an hour on most days anyway. It was a well-known and reputable school, and I thought that its mascot, the Red Fox, was as cool as the other side of the pillow. I even had the opportunity to work alongside someone who was the Red Fox mascot a few years later. In 1987, Jim Norman. Still, that one inauspicious race stuck in my craw. It was the worst race of my high school career, and I didn't want to have to wage a constant fight against a bad memory, a ghost from my past every day. So instead, I chose Geneseo. I dutifully passed the college's 3-year degree exam the spring of my senior year at high school, and I quickly chose speech communications as my major course of study. In spite of the tedious hours-long drive past trees and, well, more trees, Geneseo was a beautiful place. Once I had comfortably settled into Genesee Hall, a few yards northwest of Erie Hall, I walked uptown. Main Street looked to me like something out of an Andy Griffith TV show, a Jimmy Stewart movie, or a Norman Rockwell painting. There were local mom-and-pop stores, eateries, and elegant Victorian homes lining the thoroughfare. The Genesee Valley stretched out across the entire western horizon, and the view from any of the college dormitories was simply breathtaking. I had been to the theme parks in Orlando, Florida. I had walked the cultured sidewalks of Montreal and run through the endless cornfields in Kansas, but never had I been to a more beautiful place than Geneseo, New York. It felt like home. In reality, it was nothing at all like home. It was more like a nonstop carnival freak show to someone such as me who had lived a very regimented, proper, and isolated life growing up. Light blue and red neon beer signs in dormitory windows lit up the evening sky and served as beacons to legions of drunken co-eds staggering the way back home from the vital spot or in between. Blue hair, green hair, spiked hair, no hair, beer pong dance parties, young couples making love on rugs out in the hallways. I had never seen, nor come close to even imagining, anything like it. Folks hanging off of light posts, singing off-key in the dorm lobby at 4 a.m., wearing only one shoe, and impromptu musical jam sessions in someone's bedroom were all experiences that I marveled at and sometimes laughed at, but did my level best to keep my distance from. I was a runner. I had been taught that the effectiveness of any democracy lay almost exclusively with the will of the people, and while my contemporaries certainly could party hardy, as went the phrase, it seemed to me that they were also dangerous and irreverent risk-takers, irresponsible students, and unfaithful partners. It was a foreign way of life to me, and one that flew in the face of the very efforts that had allowed me to get to college in the first place. Beyond people getting sick the following morning, I worried that the work ethic that had helped to build this country into a superpower would one day be replaced by a society that wanted only to be shocked and entertained. But I was just 18, and 18-year-olds rarely knew much about life anyway. So I chose to put my initial worrying aside and focus instead on trying to enjoy the uniqueness of the college environment. Besides, those glowing neon beer signs were pretty cool. Back home, my success in running on the roads and in cross country had made me something of a big fish in a small pond. Whenever I showed up for a race, people knew me, and there was typically an expectation that I would win, or at least place in my age category. Having my name listed in the November 1981 issue of Runner's World for my performance at the Callicoon 9.4-mile road race was a major thrill as well, even if it was in the back portion of the magazine. I made sure that everyone knew about that. College was different. Suddenly everyone around me vying for a prize spot on the varsity team had been the top runner in their hometown as well. Some people don't adjust well to this loss of dominance, but I discovered that I preferred it. Unlike in high school, where participation in track was often encouraged simply to, quote, make one look better when applying for college, and where many teammates did not train all that seriously, there were no stragglers at this level of competition. In college, if you didn't run hard, you finished last. Every long-distance run soon became an international event in my mind. I visualized myself running in the Olympic marathon in South Korea for the USA, the flag stitched across my singlet. My cross-country teammates soon represented Japan, Brazil, Kenya, Great Britain, and Russia. And on those few days that I finished practice first, I would imagine myself standing atop the victory podium, a crowd of 50,000 roaring in approval, and announce, "My father once told me, I give you my name. What you do with it is up to you." Cue the roaring crowd. He actually had told me that, and on several occasions, but I think it was more or less a way to keep me out of trouble and not meant exclusively for an audience of wildly cheering, non-existent South Koreans. The phrase would nonetheless strongly connect with a lot of television viewers some 28 years later. I had the honor of training with some very talented Rochester area runners like Paul Dodd, Steve Stellwagen, and Steve Mack, and those from other parts of the state like Scott Ambrose, John Busquet, and Tom Ohlendorf. Under the effective coaching of the late Martin Kentner, I even earned a trip to the NCAA regional meet. If I had any lingering doubts about attending SUNY Geneseo, they were dispelled once I experienced the professional way in which Coach Kentner treated his runners. Even when a runner fell short of a particular time or goal, he would look for something positive, a silver lining, to share. Once during an over-distance 12-mile training run on Groveland Station Road, I began to stagger a bit and found myself suddenly falling off the pace. Long distances were my forte, especially out on rolling hills, where my strength could make up for a lack of blistering track speed, so this wasn't the norm. Coach Kentner pulled alongside me in his four-door sedan. He was wearing a broad smile and what looked to me like a Paul Bear Bryant hat. "What's wrong, Tiger?" I shook my head and told him I just wasn't feeling well. My energy level had dropped considerably. My legs were tiring. "Well, don't push it too hard then," he replied. He added, Your form still looks great though, Chris. You have an excellent running form." Considering his compliment as he drove off down the road ahead to support the other runners, I thought to myself, you know what? I do have excellent form. It was both efficient and consistent. I can do this. And as the course turned back towards the welcoming village at Geneseo, I recovered my stride and soon found myself back at the tail end of the lead pack. Coach Kentner was wise enough to understand that a few simple but sincere words of encouragement could go a long way, and he knew when to use them. Bravo. There were some great thrills running for Geneseo as well, such as running on courses and at colleges all across the state for the first time, including the famed Delaware Park in Buffalo. competing in the NCAA Division Regional Championships, and chasing the recent winner of a Texas Marathon to the finish line during the September 23rd alumni run. It was likely, excepting future terrifying sprints out of my dorm room in the months ahead, my most memorable run in college. I wrote in my running log that night, Tom Ollendorf is about my size, an inch or so shorter. At 3.1 miles, he surged ahead. I responded quickly. As we hit 4 miles, the first alumnus, John Nodecker, who had recently won a marathon in Texas, caught us. Then he pulled ahead. Tom told me to go with him. I couldn't believe that he expected me to go with John, but I did. I ran stride for stride with him until 6.1, then we dashed wildly for the finish. Shoot, he won 36 minutes, 16.4 seconds to 36 minutes, 16.6 seconds. There's also a great sense of camaraderie. I recall one training run conversation in which my teammates were discussing the possibility of former Geneseo runner Dale Teed naming his sons Garen and Warren. Think about it. After reflecting on the likelihood that those poor children would ruin not only their names but their parents as well, I vowed to myself to name my children with as normal a set of names as was possible. By the late fall of 1984, I had run my way into the top 5 on the team. It seemed that life couldn't get any better. The entire country was in a good mood. People were quite simply proud to be American. The United States had only months before cruised to an impressive medal count victory in the Los Angeles Summer Olympic Games, highlighted by American Joan Benot's victory in the first ever women's Olympic marathon. Time magazine did a cover story on America's upbeat mood entitled I Heart US, the same week that the college semester began. And it was not uncommon to see people walking on the sidewalks wearing t-shirts with flags on them. That or the Ghostbusters logo. But if there was one primary source, one causal factor for this national lifting of spirits, you would have to look no further than President Ronald Wilson Reagan. Reagan, a conservative Republican, had, by virtue of a booming economy, unmatched oratory skills, and having survived an assassination attempt, become very close to a legend in his own time. By late October, Newsweek and virtually every other print publication began to suggest that we were about to witness one of the greatest political landslides in American presidential history. Most of the national polls had the incumbent leading his opponent, former Vice President Democrat Walter Fritz Mondale, braced for a possible 50-state sweep, and there was talk of a political realignment. Even on college campuses across the country, often bastions of liberalism and progressive thought, one could see a multitude of Reagan-Bush 84 buttons adorning backpacks, baseball caps, and jackets. There was a magic to his delivery when he spoke, and a sense of shared purpose in his words that could not be denied. As a speech communications student, I felt compelled to analyze every word and every gesture. The only question, it seemed, was his advanced age. At 73, Reagan would not only be president if he won re-election, but the Western world's de facto leader against the Soviet Union and the still present threat of communist aggression during the Cold War. I watched along with the rest of America as Reagan put the age issue to rest with a clever, I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. And as Mondale smiled and laughed from across the stage, so too did the millions of Americans tuned into network television across the country. The question of who would win was now considered a rhetorical question. After watching the debate, which had been held in Kansas City, Missouri, I announced to my mildly unenthusiastic roommate in C2D1 that the election was effectively over. I wouldn't be so sure, he warned. I think that Mondale could still take it. I fidgeted with the circular metal Reagan Bush 84 pin on my jacket for a quick moment as I replayed the facts in my mind as I knew them. There was no other possibility. Reagan is going to win, Paul. He put down his pen and cast me a sideways glance from his desk chair, a slight smirk now on his tanned face. You want to bet on it? Sure, I replied in a higher pitched voice than I preferred. If Reagan wins, you have to buy me lunch the next day with your meal card. Deal, he replied, now leaning towards me with interest. And if Mondale wins, then I buy you lunch with my meal card? I offered with raised palms. What? He complained dramatically, as if to question my integrity. That's it? Reagan is supposed to win, right? I should get something better than that. He was absolutely right. There could be no second guessing, no doubt conveyed about my convictions or my skills of prognostication. I had no choice but to think of the most extreme, most repulsive, most outrageous offer possible. What act or gesture of recompense would be able to top all others? As I was 100% sure that Reagan would win, there would be no risk of being called on to carry it out. I went for it. If Mondale wins, I said bravely, you take a crap in my mouth. A look of surprised disgust, tinged with a hint of amusement, crossed his face. Why the hell would I want to do that? I don't know, I replied, realizing a bit too late that I might have overshot the mark on this one. I was just trying to think of something that would prove to you how certain I am that Reagan will win. I've told you before, I'm just not good at betting. Okay, he laughed while shaking his head back and forth. You can buy me lunch if Mondale wins. I'd much prefer that. Mercifully, on Wednesday, November 5th, Paul was smiling and, with his meal card in hand, motioned toward the food line at the all-too-familiar Letchworth Dining Hall. Go ahead, Mr. Reagan. Get yourself some food. Nice win. When the political dust had settled and all the votes were tallied, Reagan had won 49 of 50 states in his bid for re-election. A near sweep, with Mondale able to hold on to only his home state of Minnesota. Reagan's electoral college victory over Mondale was a staggering 525-13, and that feeling of unity and patriotism continued to stretch itself out over a welcome nation. When I had moved into room C2D1 with Paul, a naturally gifted athlete in his own right, I could have no idea how much my life would change in just a few short months. For barring the single annoyance of our residence director taping a large Ghostbusters logo on every door, I truly loathed that movie. It seemed as though everything was going my way.